And the meeting is being recorded. Got it. And I want to get things set up here. That's not what I wanted to do.
I know, I always have a hard time with it.
So, Sue, do you know how to get this set up for sharing screen? I'm not sure it was Zoom's one. So can everyone see the screen here, the PowerPoint? Keith, if you got your, turn off your mic and acknowledge me that you can see it.
I can see it, John.
Yes, I can see it. Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
great. All right, let's get this here. All right.
Good.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Let me wanted to. Tucked up in the corner. Okay, we'll get started. My name is Chad Satola. I am the Director of Solid Waste for Deschutes County, and we have a number of county staff here and members of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee with us here. So introduce a few people. I am actually going to be here for another year and 2 months, and the county has hired a co-director to work with me for the transition over the next 14 months. The solid waste siting process is one of the major programs we have going right now, and we have a succession plan so we can have some continuity in our efforts here. So this is Tim Burnell, co-director. Dwight Miller, parametrics.
Robin Moore, I'm citizen at large on the committee.
Luke Dines, citizen at large. Kim Shimke, outgoing director, now titled senior advisor. I'm responsible for this mess that you guys.
So there are 3 levels of department director in the room here today.
We're a little top heavy. Resolve itself here.
Erwin Swedman, Cascade Disposal. Chris Ogren, citizen at large.
So if the citizens at large that are online here could kind of barge in and introduce themselves.
Yes, Keith Caceres. I'm the Assistant General Manager at Sun River Owners Association. I've been there 8 years, and I was in charge of our recycling center task force in Sun River for the last 18 months.
How about Bill?
Yeah, I'm Bill Durden, Public Works Director for the City of Redmond.
Susan?
Albert Tagna, Public Works Director
Sorry.
for City of Sisters.
Susan?
Good afternoon. I'm Susan Baker with Republic Services.
Okay, I think that is all the SWAC members that are here. We have a number of citizens at large, or excuse me, interested parties here. We have some representatives from the DEQ and other groups here. So welcome everybody. I appreciate your attending this meeting today, the first of many to follow here. We have a little slideshow presentation. I want to kind of give a background to those that are not familiar with what the solid waste department does, and I'm going to kind of touch on the solid waste management plan and how we got to where we are today. And then Dwight's going to take over at that point to talk about what we're going to be doing with the solid waste advisory committee to get through this siting process here. So an overview of our department. We oversee the collection of solid waste, recycling, transfer of waste from transfer stations in the surrounding communities, and also disposal here at Knott Landfill, the only facility for disposal in the county. On the collection side, what we do is governed by ordinances, county code, and orders through the Board of County Commissioners. And we administer curbside solid waste collection outside the cities of Bend, Redmond, and Sisters. Each of those communities have their own franchise agreement with the haulers here. Our ordinances, when we establish orders, we specify a minimum service level that the franchise collectors must maintain, and also specify maximum fees are allowed to charge subscribers. And part of that, we monitor the profits that the franchise companies make off of the services they provide within Deschutes County. And we have 2 service providers in the county, Waste Connections, which services the general area south of Bend to Sun River, and then Republic Services deals with North County and South County areas towards Lapine. And I didn't have any place else to put this, but we also do hazardous waste management with Solid Waste Farm. We do a regular household hazardous waste collection program, and our contract also provides a small business hazardous waste service with that. On the recycling side, we govern a curbside collection, again, outside the city limits of Redmond, Sisters, and Bend. We also have drop-off sites at Knott Landfill, our rural transfer stations, and there are a few depots scattered around the county that are available too. With Republic Services, we have an agreement for the recycling center here at Knott Landfill, and they do a yard debris composting program for us at the Knott Landfill facility. And then another component of the recycling is education and promotion, and we rely on the franchise providers and agreements we have with the Environmental Center of Central Oregon to provide education and promotion components for our programs in the county. On the transfer side, we have 4 transfer stations in the county. Redmond, the Negus Transfer Station services Redmond and the North County area. Southwest Transfer Station is down near Lapine. It's accessible to people in the Lapine and South County area. We have a transfer station near Sisters in the Cloverdale area that services that area. And we have a small transfer station out in Alfalfa. Those sites were established when the old dumps that were located on those properties were closed in the 1990s. And we established those transfer stations to be able to provide convenient service for waste collection and recycling at those sites. On the disposal side, Knott Landfill is the only disposal facility in the county. It's been here since 1972. This picture is probably somewhere in the mid to late 70s. And over the years, we've transitioned to a modern engineered facility. We have the area that is the old unlined area of the landfill. That's at Area A that's been closed and capped at this time. And we have engineered liner systems for the balance of the site. And we do environmental monitoring at the facility and have leachate and gas management systems for managing landfill gas and the liquid that the landfill generates. And we're anticipated to reach capacity in 2029. And that's kind of one of the reasons that you're all here today. When we were putting the solid waste management plan together under Tim Shimke's era here, that was finished in 2019. And the primary areas of focus in that plan were expanding, improving recycling programs. We were actually getting ready to roll a lot of that out before the pandemic hit. We were actually going to have a company on board for doing a waste composition study at the landfill, and the pandemic kind of put the brakes on anything. But also the state of Oregon has been revamping and updating a lot of the regulations on recycling. So we're waiting for some of that to roll out before we start focusing on that part of the program. Another part of the plan was to identify infrastructure and facility needs and improvements. Our transfer stations are pretty old. They were built in the late 1990s and mid to late 90s, and they are suffering from old age and capacity issues. So we're getting ready actually to bid for to construct a new recycling and transfer station up in Redmond. The last part of it was evaluating and identifying future disposal needs with Knott Landfill closing. So we took a look at 3 different directions for future disposal. One was use of alternative technologies. Second was looking at transfer of the county's waste to a regional landfill. There are several large landfills along the Columbia Gorge that have many years of capacity, and that was one of the options we considered. And the third option was siting a new facility in Deschutes County. So with alternative technologies, substantial cost to construct those facilities. They're not inexpensive. In addition to that, there are limitations with those. Believe it or not, some of these technologies require more waste than we generate in Deschutes County. A common one out there is waste energy. There's a waste energy facility in the Salem area, and they combust the waste and produce electricity with it. We actually don't generate enough waste to make one of those pencil out for us. The markets for technologies that produce fuel products are not established in the region. There are processes where you can take waste and make a solid fuel out of it. And there are some of those technologies in the United States, but we just don't have markets in this area for that. There's a lot of emerging technologies out there, lots of GWIS things that are a little bit larger than a laptop system, but they're not available in full scale application. And we did not want to become a guinea pig for anybody testing something else out. So we passed on that. And the bottom line in this also is, regardless of the technology, there's always going to be a need for landfill disposal residuals or things that can't be processed in the technology. So the other option we looked at was waste transfer to a regional landfill. There's 4 large landfills up on the Columbia Gorge, and they range in distance from 130 to 200 miles from Knott landfill. If you look at what the waste stream for Knott landfill is today, that would be 40 to 50 semi trucks running out of Deschutes County up through Shannaco and places like that, hauling our waste. So round trip with those many trucks each day. These are 2019 costs when we did the solid waste management plan. The estimated disposal costs range from $47 to $62 a ton. That included transportation, the tip fee for the landfill, and a host fee that's paid to the community that hosts the landfill. For an in-county landfill, the division that came out of the solid waste management plan was approximately 30 miles from Knott landfill. We were at the time we're looking at 500 acres area, 250 for the landfill, and a minimum 250 acre buffer zone around the landfill. 100-year capacity was one of the objectives, and it's likely that 100 years a facility is probably going to last a lot longer than 100 years. As time goes on, technologies are going to advance, and what we're designing or building today for 100 years capacity could be hundreds of years of capacity as technology and recycling and diversion improve their costs. Again, these are 2019 costs. Siting and permitting about $3 million. Initial site construction, $11 million, and the estimated transportation disposal cost would be about $42 a ton. And just to put it in perspective, the current cost for disposal of waste at Knott landfill is $35.21 a ton. So we discounted the alternative technologies and focused primarily on the regional versus in-county sites. So I'm just going to go through this table real quickly. Looking at implementation considerations, the advantage went to an existing regional landfill. They already have the land use permits, DEQ permits in place. Venturing into something in Deschutes County, we would have to go through that permitting process, and there's always the proposition of appeals in the process. Regional economic impacts, the advantage goes to an in-county landfill. Those jobs and revenues will remain here in Deschutes County. Costs for disposal. Again, advantage is the local landfill, $42 a ton and 2019 dollars. Rate stability, the advantage goes to a local landfill. Transportation costs are less of a concern. Certainly right now, with fuel prices going up, these cost per ton prices are probably an underestimate. And there's also rate stability if county operated. Agreements with host facilities outside of the area can pose some risk for us here. With system flexibility, that advantage goes to the county. There's maximum flexibility when considering changes to the waste stream. If you're looking at a regional landfill that we have no control over, we sign an agreement for taking waste there. If all of a sudden we develop something locally where we're diverting a particular waste stream out of what would be normally going to the landfill, that opens us up for contract negotiations or a put or pay where we've agreed to pay X amount of dollars per year for X amount of tons. We reduce the tons, we may still be stuck paying those tons. So the flexibility stays with the county side of things. Reliability, again, a local landfill has that advantage. This has been a fairly mild winter. If you can imagine 40 or 50 trucks full of waste stacked up here in Deschutes County waiting for Highway 97 to clear out to get up to the gorge here. Weather or construction, other interruptions can be a real challenge for a long haul operation. Greenhouse gas emissions, it's even across the board. It doesn't matter where the waste goes, it's still going to generate that greenhouse gas. So it's even across there. Transportation emissions, if you look at what it would take to move that waste to the Columbia Gorge, you're looking at over 2 million truck miles a year, with a local landfill about 350,000 truck miles a year. So there's a significant advantage when you're looking at carbon footprint for moving waste a long distance. Land impacts, these regional landfills are already in operation, so the regional facility has the advantage there. With the New Wayne County landfill, it may require land disturbance. And I use the term may in there because there are some mining operations there that may or may not work out as a possible site for a future landfill. And then the final factor on these tables is public support. During the development of the solid waste management plan, we had a number of, I think there were 3 different surveys. 2 of them were informal, and the commissioners asked us to have a formal scientific survey done. And the support was range from 73 to 93% of the community favoring of landfill sited within Deschutes County. Ultimately, the decision was made. Oops, how did that? There we go. So ultimately, the decision was made to the board to site a landfill in Deschutes County. That was a recommendation that was made by the Solid Waste Advisory Committee back in 2019. So that's how we got to where we are today. So the role and involvement of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee in this new process we're going through is to review information on the site selection process for a new solid waste management facility. We're using the term solid waste management facility. A landfill is definitely the driving factor on what we're going to be doing here, but this is an opportunity for co-location of other waste management type facilities, material recovery facilities to divert waste out of the waste stream, possibly some kind of a process for generating gas off of organic materials through a digestion process. So we're trying to steer to using the term solid waste management facility because there's a number of opportunities that'll come up with siting a new landfill. Another role that the Solid Waste Advisory Committee will provide here is providing input and guidance through this process. We're going to be working very closely with parametrics on the process here, and the input of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee is an important part of that. Ultimately, the SWAC is going to make those recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. It won't be the Solid Waste Department. It will be through the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. And the first task we'll be tackling today that Dwight will talk about is the first thing that will be taken to the board here, hopefully in a few weeks. And then ultimately, there's going to be a recommendation for a site for a future solid waste management facility in the county. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Dwight.
Great. Thanks, Chad. I really want to reiterate the fact that this is a solid waste management facility. It's not meant to just be a landfill. And actually landfills today are a lot different from what landfills were in the past. For instance, right now, not landfill, you're looking at a renewable natural gas project as part of that RNG process to pull the gas off the landfill. That's a significant amount of gas to be able to put back into pipeline or for vehicle use or whatever. That's kind of where landfills are going these days. I mean, really to the point of being resources and resource extraction out of the landfill, and landfill gas being one key element of that. As Chad noted as well, there's opportunities for more direct digestion, like a dry digestion system for generating renewable natural gas at a facility like this. Some different ways to manage the materials and to actually extract as much resources out of them as possible. And then that's also key to different recycling programs. As everybody knows, recycling goes up and down as far as what's accepted, and you know, it's been pretty tough the last 3 to 4 years because of restrictions and China and other Asian countries as far as what can be recycled, and you know, because those have typically been the markets for our materials. And so be able to provide opportunities for maybe more advanced sorting, collection, and so forth, and being able to use this facility to help that out is pretty significant. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We're not just, you know, okay, we're going to find a place to put a landfill, but it's really to look at this overall management facility. And that's not pie in the sky. I think it's really a point is that the county has, under Tim's direction and the rest of the county staff here, have done a really good job of developing Knott into you know, really a showcase facility. And that's kind of what we're looking at for a new facility as well. Very well managed, organic materials, the green waste and so forth pulled out to minimize the amount of organics that go into the cell. So it's really looking at it from the standpoint of, okay, let's take this good experience here and take it to a new facility. And so really taking that tack.
And being a good neighbor is at the core of that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Here, since we're so close, but we'll carry that to the new landfill as well.
That's a really good point. And that's actually something to share too. That if any SWAC members, and I'll volunteer this for Chad, but any SWAC members who wants to take a look at what's going on here at Knott, I think it's really good experience to see the operation here, and this is the type of operation you're looking at a new facility. It's a good neighbor policy. It's really what it is for sure. So here is this diagram is kind of provides the overall approach to siting in county facility, and I really like to make the point that the process the county went through that wrapped up in 2019 with the final solid waste management plan, that was really key to setting the kind of the foundation for the siting process. It established the need, for one thing, as Chad noted, 2029 is pretty much when Knott is looking at being full and needing to have a new facility online. And while that seems, that's 7 years away. Well, that's not very long. And so when you think about siting and development of the new facility and all that 7 years will go fairly quickly. And so the solid waste management plan really set the stage for the process we're in now. So the idea here with this, we call this the coffee filter, the paint filter, however you want to term it, but essentially we're filtering down to the ultimate site. And so, final thing being property acquisition for that site. But so what we're looking at is kind of a canvassing of the entire county. So that's kind of the top level. And so this non-specific conceptual design, so we kind of know how big this has to be. That's what Chad noted. We'd like something around 500 acres. Depending on the site, it doesn't necessarily have to be 500 acres. For instance, if it's adjacent to BLM land, for instance, BLM generally is pretty good neighbor from the standpoint of, okay, that's kind of buffer lands for you in a way. And so maybe in that case, you wouldn't have to have the full 500 acres, but it is pretty much 250 acres for the landfill itself. And then, the desire to have the buffer around that. And so
How big again is Knott landfill?
143 acres.
And that's a good point. So that's 50 years worth of waste at this point here at Knott. A lot of growth in the county over that time, and now we're looking at trying to find a site that's good for 100 years. And and likely, as Chad noted, that'll probably last a lot longer than that because new technologies and just kind of new ways that we're using materials as well. Going into the future. So based upon this overall looking at sites across the county, we start kind of drilling in a little bit more, and so broad area screening, starting looking at specific sites and apply these criteria that we've developed. And so everybody received the criteria. We've developed these draft criteria and these are based upon our experience. And when I say our experience, it's the county's experience as well as our experience in siting landfills. I worked on my first landfill siting project over 35 years ago, and I've been doing them since, although there's not been a lot of landfills sited in the last 25 years, but other facilities have been sited, and we've actually kind of have used that as an opportunity to kind of say, okay, well, what are we looking at just generally in the process for siting facilities? And so that's what's gone into the criteria, and I'll get into that a little bit more detail in a moment here, but I just to lay the foundation there for this. And so we're going down through this screening of facilities. So we're looking at data collection, and back 35 years ago, we were pretty much looking at paper maps and a lot of paper information on these sites. Now we've got this great geographical information systems, GIS, which is very powerful. So the state, the federal government, and local agencies have really good what are called layers within the GIS system and mapping system to allow for evaluation of a lot of the criteria that we've developed, which is really invaluable to ensure that we're really looking at areas that are appropriate for a facility like this. So it's based upon that information that then we will go through these screenings. So the broad screening is pretty high level. We're looking, really pulling that off of the GIS system, and some site review, but not a lot. And it's really to determine what general areas are particularly good for facilities, what areas pretty much aren't, and those are kind of determined on some issues that we'll get into in the criteria, but particularly around natural resources and groundwater protection. I mean, those are, and then obviously land use considerations, but those are kind of the big ones that drive us towards certain areas within the county ultimately. And so going down, focused area screening, where we evaluate between these sites, and then really get into more detailed investigations of those. And the idea being is that the final 3 sites to go into very rigorous field screenings of those sites. From stuff on the surface, biology and cultural resources, down to the subsurface, the hydrogeology, the geology, and so forth. And then as well as how that impacts the cost of developing the site too. And then ultimately a final site coming out of this process. There we go. Okay. So this is the schedule that actually came out of the solid waste management plan. So back in 2019, we had a little pandemic in the middle here, so that kind of pushed things out somewhat. We still feel really good about the schedule and being able to go through permitting pretty much through the next roughly 3-year process here. So at the end of 2025, have the facility permitted, and that's pretty much what it'll take then to develop a site out there wherever it happens to be. So the siting period here that was established in 2019 will go through this year, somewhat into next year as we drill into those final sites, both figuratively and literally drill into them, and so that kind of overlapping into this permitting process, but feel pretty confident about the timing for permitting and then going into final development. And really the point here being that there is a lot to do once we do find a site. There's securing the site through acquisition, as well as all the utilities that need to come to the site and other development things. And so it takes a while to do that. And you want to have some shakeout time between the 2 sites. So it's not like you turn the dial on the last day here and then you start out there, wherever that happens to be on the next day, because there is a need for some overlap between the 2. It definitely helps the operations.
So you're expecting this committee to kind of come up with the final site by End of this year or?
So into 23 is kind of what we're saying.
So right now, the schedule is over the next 12 to 14 months, we're gonna go through this coffee filter process to narrow down to 3 sites. And officially, that's the end of our current agreement with Parametrics. We couldn't really identify a scope of work for on the boots on the ground process there. So the current process is gonna be go through this criteria process and narrow it down to 3 sites. If Dwight and his team have been doing a good job, I'm sure the county would be happy to negotiate, and continue to work with them on it. The committee will stay involved and active as we filter out those 3 sites to a single site. And so the committee will make that recommendation to the board for final site once we get through that entire process. But again, it's that inverted triangle Dwight showed there. We're gonna look at every place in the county, narrow it down to 3, narrow it down to 1. So the get down to 3 is in the next 12 to 14 months.
Yeah, and typically that process for doing that detailed work on those 3 takes about a year. I mean, because it's a fair amount of field work, particularly when you're looking at geology, hydrogeology, and you need to get into it in fairly good detail at that point.
I think it's kind of important to note that this committee will be making a recommendation. And it's, I mean, ours are strongly in favor of the board accepting that recommendation we have. And everybody on the committee needs to know that the board may decide to go with a different site than this committee recommended. So I've been involved where the committee was totally upset that the board didn't accept their recommendation. But I can give everybody the heads up. It's not you're not making a decision. You're making a recommendation and the board will make a final decision. It might different components.
Yeah, and I'll make it clear that we're your technical advisors, we're your technical team working on this, and we really work with the county and with the SWAC to ensure that, you know, we're working for you, and then looking at sites and determining which sites are appropriate to go forward with, and then to actually do that detailed work out there.
In the development of the management plan, the consultant helped us with that, worked really, really hard to avoid laying out a plan and looking for a stand. You know, we're trying to draw input all the way through that. You know, I think this will be the same way. Yeah, we're not just gonna, you know, plop in front of you and say, here's the best thing. You know, put your stamp on it. So we're looking for involvement.
So you have a question?
Yeah, were there any adjustments to the schedule developed in 2019 after the census update and based on recent population growth?
As far as the site life or not landfill?
Yes.
So
And to include the expected remaining life of not landfill.
Yeah, interesting question. So in development of the our budget for the coming year, we do forecasts on growth with the landfill. And I don't know how Tim did this, but for years he's used 3%. We grow 3% a year. I went back to 2006 looking at our waste flows, and we had years where we increased as high as 12%. In 2006, we lost 18%. You take all those bumps out, it's 2.4% growth from 2006 to today. I found the video from that URS produced, and that was done in like 2001. And in that videotape, Tim said not landfill reach capacity in 2029. Out of all of the things that gone on with growth and recessions, we're on track for 2029. I was
Okay, so one way or another, we're going to make it to 2029.
We're going to make it to 2029 based on what Tim said in 2001. Yes, it was quite remarkable to see that. In fact, he overestimated it by 0.6%.
Okay, thank you.
We always knew Tim was a prophet.
I'm no longer the director. I'm held responsible.
That's a really good question, though, and that is a real point of solid waste generation. It does really fluctuate with the economy. I mean, that's typically what we see is that, you know, it goes down during recessions and goes up during growth.
So also recognize that, I mean, we recognize when we put the management plan together, that my prediction might not necessarily come true in 2029. So we do have options for lengthening that. So if it looks like we're not going to get there, we're not going to have the new landfill by 2029, we can start diverting Redmond waste to maybe Cook County's landfill, or we can do some short-term things to buy the life we need to get to this forward.
So it's possible some of those alternative technologies might come to be.
The plan kind of has us looking at the state of that kind of technology every 3 to 5 years. So yeah, we're in that process. We've had one assessment since the plan was adopted, and kind of a similar thing. Some advancement in technology for dealing with organics specifically, but the big ones, and I'll point out that there's very few technologies out there that will take the waste like the landfill takes the waste, Most of them, or many of them, are targeting certain sections of the waste stream, So I don't think it's a situation where we've got a landfill, and suddenly, hey, we're going to build a plant and no longer use the landfill. No, we're likely to have a landfill that is decided in organics processing, and maybe a construction and demolition processing, and it'll come together like that.
Yeah.
My prediction.
You get back on it.
We got it on video.
Yeah, video again. So this next slide here, it lays out the draft criteria.
Can I just jump
Yeah,
in?
go ahead.
So we're going to start talking about this criteria document, this technical memorandum that hopefully you all have here. The Board of County Commissioners has asked to review and put their stamp on this. So this is actually going to be the first official recommendation that the SWAC is going to make, is you put your stamp on this and agree with it, and we'll take it to the board for their approval. So we're not expecting you guys to give us your answer today. I want to give you guys a few weeks to digest and think about this, but my goal hopefully is to get this to the board towards the end of May. And once we have the board's blessing on this, then we're really going to start getting down to the nuts and bolts on this thing here. So
You didn't print an extra copy, but.
there's some outside the
Packets
door.
up,
Yeah. Yeah. Can you grab one for Udara here too?
I've
Robert?
got one.
Oh, you got one? Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Oh, great. That's right. Environmental center people, everything's paper.
Oh, yeah. She could search it and track us as we go.
So I just wanted to put that up. So just to dial in your focus as Dwight talks about this.
Yeah, so that is one of the things that you received was the technical memorandum, which includes the criteria and kind of how we develop the criteria, and just kind of an overview of them, and then the evaluation method actually once we move forward with the criteria, once they're approved. And so I'm going to go pretty high level here. If you've already had a chance to look at it, that'd be great. If you have any questions or you want some clarity on it, but it is probably one of those things that it's good to dive in and take a look at the criteria and how we developed it and kind of the rationale behind it. But I'll go through some of the kind of the higher level things here. So generally, when we look at landfills, there's kind of three areas that we're particularly looking at. And those are our site characteristics and engineering. So these are kind of the determiners of what makes a site work for the development of a landfill, as well as the other activities that we might have at the site. So these are such things as size, the geology of the site, and that means both kind of the geotechnical, so slope stability, seismic impacts, meaning earthquake, and how it responds to an earthquake. Those are really critical pieces of the site. They're so critical. Those are some of the ones that you will note in here are fatal flaw criteria. There are certain areas, and these are actually from federal government down to state government onto the county, that say, if there is an unstable area, you cannot develop a landfill there because you could lose the landfill. if it is on a Holocene fault, meaning it's in the last in the Holocene area, meaning now, in about the last 10,000 years, that it is not a site that can be developed, meaning that you're really trying to get stable sites. So once you have a great location based upon that, then you can start looking at the other engineering determinations. And so those can be things such as we have in here, the soils and geology of the site. So does it have the type of materials that we need to use for a landfill in particular, such as the rock that we need for drainage layers and for operations of the site, and the soils that are needed for the final cover of the site to ensure that, for environmental protection. So it's really those types of things that go into play in the site characteristics and engineering. And this is also where the geology and hydrogeology are part. Those are significant characteristics. Again, those are a couple of those are fatal flaw areas that if a site is over a sole source aquifer, meaning it's used for drinking water, it's not going to be a landfill site. And so it's really to ensure environmental and public health protection in that case. The next area is natural environment. Particular areas here that come into play are wetlands and waters. And so while you might say in the high desert, we don't have a lot of wetlands, that makes them that much more critical when they are there. And so it's a very important area is, streams and wetlands and so forth. Wildlife and threatened and endangered species. A particular concern in Deschutes County is sage grouse. You'll see criteria that are directed specifically to that, because there are some very important areas that really are not allowed to be developed in because of sage grouse, as well as other endangered species too. And then migratory birds and so forth. So some of these are fatal flaws, that will keep an area from being able to be developed. Others may not be, but it's scaled based upon that. And then the kind of the third area is land use. So this is as basic as proximity to airports, which is regulated from the feds on down, FAA. Because of bird strike concerns. And that's why there are very big restrictions on landfills and actually other solid waste operations around airports. And so those are very prescriptive, and you'll note that that's another one of the fatal flaw areas. Site zoning, adjacent land use, and so as to not impact various adjacent land uses. Site visibility and aesthetics, which is somewhat akin to the neighbors, but a little bit farther distant views. Transportation needs and impacts to the potential neighbors for those haul routes to a facility, and then other kind of on-site such as displacement of people who are currently on piece of property, known historic and cultural resources, which is very critical of these sites, and then there's a couple of criteria there. So what you will see in this, and so this kind of lays the slide that's up there right now kind of breaks these down. So we have these top three areas, and then we break it down into the next level, which breaks each of those down into further. And then some of those are even further broken down into criteria at a third level. The reason we break these down like this is how we actually weighted the criteria. And so we first weighted, and I really want to emphasize, this is draft. This is based upon our past experience, the county's past experience, and working together with the technical team and experts on coming up with these weights, but really would like to get input on that, because did we hit those weightings correctly? So the general idea being that these site characteristics and engineering, about 35% of the weight at that first level. The natural environment also 35% weight, and then land use 30%. So fairly consistent across those three areas. But then, you know, breaking it out further after that. And so as you will see, next slide. Oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, sorry, good. So on this slide, and it's also, it may be hard to see on the screen, so it's also page 3 of the technical memorandum, where we break down the levels. And so we further break those down into, you know, the breakdown between each of those categories at level 2 and then again at level 3. So you can kind of see the idea that we're ultimately coming down to a weight for every one of those criterion, and then that rolls up to the ultimate site score on these sites. So the other piece of it, so that's the weighting. That's the weighting of the criterion, really relative to one another. And then within a criterion, and we can go to the first one here, which is ownership. So this is at the top of page 5 of the technical memorandum. And what you'll see there are scorings within that criterion. So we break it out by categories for this area, which is ownership. So how, you know, the ownership of the property that we're looking at. If it's owned by Deschutes County, we kind of see that thumbs up. That is probably the best. You know, that's the easiest for the county to permit, to obviously acquire, because it may just be an internal county transfer as opposed to an actual acquisition from outside the county. The next being state or municipal properties. And so that has, so the top score on anything is a 5, and then it just goes down from that. And so the next one, the state or municipal, we gave that a 4. Generally, intergovernmental transfers are fairly easy at the state, municipal, county level. It gets more difficult at the federal. That's why the federal is all the way down to at 1. And it's really because of the way the acquisition process is on the federal, and the level of rigor that they require to allow for an acquisition or transfer of federal properties to others go. They are really stewards of their lands, federal lands, and so they really take it seriously when lands go from the federal level to other governmental level. So before that, we have private, and then we have federal surplus property. And so that's kind of the direction that these go, and with a score a little bit lower each time. So these scores with the weight ultimately gives the overall score for that criterion for that site. And so you can see it gets to be quite a spreadsheet process here of adding up all these scores across multiple sites. But that's kind of the rigor that it takes to evaluate all of these different sites that we're looking at. And so we break down every one of the criterion based upon scoring such as this, and what's the best situation versus what's the lowest situation. What you will see in here, some of them are given a 0 score. A 0 score is also a fatal flaw. So a fatal flaw meaning that based upon that criterion, that site cannot move forward. At some level, we can determine that at this broad level, just off of the GIS mapping that we're doing. At others, we need to drill down a little bit deeper into some of these sites to determine if that's actually the case. That's particularly with cultural resources and some of the natural resources issues, because it's hard to tell based upon the mapping that's out there, because the mapping the mapping is only as granular as it is, and down to that detail of a given site. And so we really have to take a look at some of these sites to determine if we can actually move forward with them. So that's kind of boiling us down fairly quickly on how we came up with the criteria. Any questions yet? Yeah, Robin.
Yeah, so just to be sure I understand. So say the GIS folks identified 20 sites that are 500 acres. Would you first then look at all the 20 for a fatal flaw? Just, without going through all this analysis, but you see that obviously we're spending more time on that one.
Yes, and that's a really good point. So back to
Airport's a great example.
yes, airport's a great example, and so some of these we're actually able to map out, and based upon the mapping, they actually won't even proceed to that point because they will be within the 10,000 feet from the end of a runway, or from a runway, which is what the FAA requirement is. And so ultimately, those sites won't even get to that broad screening because that fatal
So
flaw.
there's a step in your kind of, maybe it's not in this report, but yeah.
Yeah, and actually I'm gonna go. Where are we here?
So you're gonna look at those 18 things.
Yes,
Just
yeah.
at a very quick level to see.
We are, and those also fall out, and some of the mapping in particular does allow for this. The Holocene fault, for instance, issue. And so, based upon what the what the fault layout is across the county, we can fairly quickly look at areas that that fall within that and then stay away from those areas. It's a really good point, and that really is this top level, non-specific conceptual design, but then also the looking at that first broad brush screening of sites, and ultimately one of the first screenings is size. I mean, what is the kind of the universe of sites out there that meet this what we're saying is roughly 250 to 300 acres, because we don't necessarily want to throw those out as a fatal flaw if it doesn't have 500 acres, because ultimately it could be next to a neighbor that like BLM or some other neighbor that allows you to have the tighter buffers, and so we don't want to throw those out right away. But at the same time, we can do some fairly high level screening fairly quickly that way.
I guess just a hot question here. Another just kind of citizen reaction is that this looks very engineering analytical, but that's maybe not the way at least the average person makes decisions. But if this was your private thing, you might just say, well, which site has the lowest cost of operation? Because that's what the taxpayers going to be concerned about. And then, what are the flaws or problems with it? Oh, that one is too many. Okay, what is sort of the next one, versus, coming up with a score with all these things for a large number of sites. I'm not sure what in the end, it might be something, a gradient of something, but that really, make the decisions based on that number.
And that it's a really good point, Robin. That's why we go from this broad area screening to the focused area screening, because ultimately it has to pass, environmental geotechnical muster, essentially, as well as size, for the facility. Cost is a big deal, and that's a big part of the site development criteria, is kind of getting at some of these things that are major cost elements for a facility, such as the rock, and soil materials that are available, the depth to groundwater protection of groundwater, and that is a natural protection, which is more cost effective. And so these really do drive to really It really is the triple bottom line of sustainability. It is, what site is most environmentally beneficial, which one is, best for the people, and which one is best for profit, so to speak. People, planet, and profit.
But when you look at this, I guess where's cost in there?
So we actually talked about cost, and we elected to put that into when we get down to the final 3 sites. It's just far too speculative at the broad base to apply a cost factor to a wide spectrum of sites. So just when you start looking at cost analysis of specific design details, that kind of filters down, and that focus is put into those shortlisted sites.
Right now you have haul distance in here, but that's only 50% of 10 of 35%. So it's very small.
Correct. It is. The main point being is that these other things are very important as well. But at the same time, I mean, it's good to get the input of the committee here, because I mean, did we weight these properly?
Yeah, I think it's critical that whatever we come up with is justified. So you maybe jump hoops here that you really don't need to spend a whole lot of time on, but when it comes down to it, and we're saying this is the one we want, and the neighbor says, well, why didn't you look over there? Or you're really be able to justify the choice in the end. But if you have those things, I mean, that's the idea, I think, of the weighting of the criteria, to try and take into account what you're talking about, so maybe it's not so much technical, but we're going to score it because we think it's got a lot of emotional appeal or something like that.
Yeah.
There's definitely subjectivity to it as well. I mean, in a perfect world, you make it very objective, but in reality, there has to be some subjectivity to it.
Chad, I want to go back to what you said a little bit earlier. I share similar concerns with Robin, like as a non-expert, as a citizen reviewing some of these, like we're doing this for 100 years. So obviously we want to prioritize everything that's a 5, right? We want to build the best thing we possibly can. But what if, the costs associated with a 5 are 3 or 4 times as high as the costs associated with a 4 or a 3? In terms of the process of only looking at cost once we narrow it down to 3 sites.
No, I wasn't saying that the cost is one of the factors we're going to scrutinize much more closely at that level than in this level. No, it's not cost driven at 3 sites. Absolutely not.
Cool.
No,
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and then I understand that some of these, it's tough to assign a cost to like a distance or something like that, but I'm looking at like page 13, the soil specifically, like active area can provide all required material, all well-graded daily and intermediate cover soils, and all final cover, versus 50% of required drainage and everything else is 100%. And then it's like, well, how much do we actually have to pay to truck that over?
And that was a perfect one to bring up to help with Robin's discussion here, because soil is a big cost in landfill operations. So even though there's not a dollar symbol anywhere in this discussion, this is based on dollars here as to the soil availability.
Yeah, and
so
it's like a layperson, it's hard for me to understand. What what a 5 versus a 4 means when there's no cost associated.
Right, but this is a cost determination. It just doesn't have a particular value to it. But you start looking at the true value of those costs of those soils when we're in that shortlist site part of it. You can't run the numbers on this on 20, 40 sites, whatever.
And I have one other question. Do we have like, I might be putting the cart before the horse a little bit, but do we have like an assessment of how many possible properties fit? Like if we look at every property in Deschutes County that was all 5s, do we know how many there are? Or is that we're doing the criteria first and then we'll go out and look?
We're doing the criteria first. We haven't been dilly-dallying since 2019. We've been working internally on I want to make sure we didn't take a vacation until now, but we've been working on a GIS application to do screening for sites with the county's IT people there. So once we get this pinned down and approval, then we can start applying that and looking at the county-wide and start looking at those sites.
Is there like a possibility that there's no properties in Deschutes County that are all 5?
I suppose there could be. Yeah. Well, yeah, but the goal is not to find a site with all 5s. We're going to assign point values to these and 3 of them are gonna filter at the top of the highest score. It'd be great if we find one that scored 5s all the way across the board, but yeah, I just want to make sure you're saying all 5s, so that's not what we're after. You know, in a perfect world, we would get that, but
The highest average.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Cool, okay, thank you.
You know, and just so you know, I mean, one of the really important things in facility siting is that you go in as unbiased as possible. And so we've made a particular point not to pre-screen the county and say, oh yeah, this is where it can be, because you know, some of it floats to the top just because you see some of this information, and you know, and it might be the overlays for sage grouse, for instance.
And precipitation is like a main concern the further towards the mountains you get.
Yeah. And so there's some of those things that you know are going to be applied. But at the same point, you want to be as objective as possible. So we've generated these with kind of a general knowledge of the county, but not specific looking at those in the county to be as unbiased as possible. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good question. Any other?
Yeah, I've got a quick question. So is the plan to move like the administrative building that everyone is sitting in now, would that also move out to the new landfill, or would that remain in place at the existing knot facility? And the reason I ask that, I think people would want to know going forward, you know, what will happen to the existing knot facility at some point down the road, 10, 20 years later, what's it going to become? That might be important for people to know as well.
So when we were designing these facilities, the intent of this is that these will all remain here. So Resident Bend is not going to drive 30 miles out of town to a landfill. Resident Bend's going to drive to the existing transfer station and not landfill. And then we're going to move the waste out to the facility. There's going to be a recycling center here. This office will remain here for the duration. So nothing's going to go away here. Landfill won't go away. Hopefully in the early 2030s, there'll be a park or something out there.
Okay.
But these facilities remain at this location.
Great. That's good to know. Thank you.
Actually, I'm really glad you did raise that, Keith.
When we look at can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so when we're looking at sites, we are looking at a limited access facility. And so when you see things about haul routes and transportation and things like that, it is the haul vehicles primarily going from the transfer stations, including here at Knott Landfill. The facility here will be a transfer station to go out to a new facility. And so there's several reasons for that. One of which is to really make it more convenient and have a high level of service for the residents in being able to use a facility here, but also really to reduce that impact to the neighbors. This goes back to Tim's point about, you know, good neighbor, you know, to limit the impacts out at, because most likely a facility is going to be in a much more rural area, and you want to reduce the impacts as much as possible based upon that.
Makes sense. Thank you.
All this information on this, what, 40, 50 different criteria, every single site out there that the screens of first go, no-go.
So yeah, so what ends up happening is you just need a.
Well, we're trying to get power to this.
Yeah,
actually, I think I have it here.
Hey, you can still hear us, Keith? You're the one up on the screen right now. Give me a thumbs up. Yeah, okay, great.
Oh. My phone does once in a while.
You gotta get one of these. Yeah. Thank you, Scott. All right. All right.
Okay.
You're hired.
Yeah. I want to make sure I don't leave it.
I knew it was reaching hard.
So that saves on batteries. There you go. So we're.
I was just wondering if,
Oh,
for all the sites that, there'll first be an initial, you know, to go, no go, pass type thing. And after that, every single site will have all 40, 50 of these things measured and estimated, or will it be some subset of them?
So how we will do this, and this is what's so great about GIS. Actually, it was interesting. It says not too many landfills have been cited in the last 25 years. One of the last landfills we cited was 25 years ago. And it was right when GIS was starting to come out. And it was great to have the rigor of mapping like that to be applied to this. So what we did and what we'll do here is essentially apply these generically to the county, and particularly the fatal flaw items. And so we lay out the airports, we lay out the unstable areas that are available under the U.S. Geological Service and other criteria like that. We apply that across the county, and fairly quickly you're able to kind of show zones that are not available. And then you see what sites, county owned and others owned, that are big enough that could possibly fit within the areas that are still good. And so that actually ends up screening out quite a bit of those sites that could look like they might work, but we haven't applied any criteria out there yet to be able to say, these areas are not going to work. So that really is this next step, and we will be starting that relatively quickly here, because and in fact, one of the things, as Chad said, we haven't been sitting on our hands. We've got a pretty rigorous GIS system already put together to be able to apply all of this once we get a kind of the thumbs up on the final criteria. EPA has, I think there's 7 drop dead criteria. Yeah. So that gets looked at right away, kind of the first kind you're talking about, So if they're too close to an airport, if they're in a floodplain, if they're, yada, 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 there's 6 or 7 of them, so that gives you a first cut.
So, yeah, first step.
There may be others that we consider fatal flaws that will probably get, sussed out in the next cut, that kind of thing.
Who's responsible for applying the scores to each criteria? Like, is that something that SWAC members are gonna do as a group or individually and then average them, or? Is that
I would expect that we would develop scores and then go through those with you guys for review and comment.
Okay.
And we want to make it very clear, we don't want to drive this, but it's a pretty big task if you're looking at 50 sites and 50 criteria, and to intelligibly be able to apply those criteria. We have this team on board here that is very knowledgeable in geotech, wildlife, things like that. There'll be some work done with you guys, but anything that's coming out of this is going to have to be reviewed and with your stamp of approval on it.
Cool.
Yeah. If you want to.
I would say this is all volunteer, so I don't know how much time commitment. 50 sites, but happy to be involved. Yeah.
I mean, and that's why it's really important, and another reason why we go into this with as much of an unbiased approach as possible, so that you can buy into the criteria. So let's get that settled, and then we apply it.
Cool.
And then you can take a look at how we apply it. Okay, did they really look at this right, and as objectively as possible apply the criteria out there, to this myriad of sites. And just to give you a little bit more background on our team, we've got a pretty broad team of engineers, scientists, and planners that are experts on every one of these criteria. I mean, that's kind of how we went about this. And for instance, on the engineering, for example, we have Jerry Friesen and Associates, who has worked for the county, 25 to 30 years at this point, has done most of the development engineering here at Knott.
We brought Jerry on because he really knows how to develop a landfill and as well as how that works into other operations here in the county. And so we really wanted to have that expertise. And so we have that expertise on the team. And then, biologists that have worked a lot with sagebrush, other threatened and endangered species. We have the hydrogeologist that has worked here at NOC to be the hydrogeologist for the project, as well as, and that's actually doesn't work for our firm. We have a lot of sub-consultants working on this too, because we really wanted to make sure the top people who really know Deschutes County are on the team.
Are you working through a single federal agency representative, or are you having to deal with all the individual federal agencies on these different?
For the most part, it will be to those federal agencies specific to that criteria.
Okay, so like US Fish and Wildlife.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. And that's actually probably all right, because the way that the criteria really are pretty much, they're broken out enough that, it's like the threatened and endangered species. It's going to be US Fish and Wildlife, as well as state agencies too, as well as the local overlays of all those items too, within land use code. Yeah. Other questions?
Well, if it comes down to acquisition for federal lands, how will you interact with those agencies regarding that?
So I can speak to that a little bit. Actually, Tim could probably shed some light. He did speak with the Bureau of Land Management several years ago. They have a list of surplus sites. Is that what they call them?
Disposable, I guess.
Yeah. So these are sites that the BLM has put on a list that says we might be willing to trade or sell. And that's a number two, not a number one.
Right.
A number one, if we're looking at a piece of federal land as the final site, it's almost literally an act of Congress to do if it's not on the disposal site. So that will be a challenge, and that's one of the reasons that has that low of a score.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We went and talked to BLM, and they said, well, yeah, we have an inventory of, there may be something there that interests you, but maybe not.
And
That's
you'll
what
have
we have.
that in your GIS mapping.
And
database.
we can consider trade and we can consider purchase, and they kind of prioritize those for us. So, if the ones that we have on our disposal list, we've done all the environmental works that we can quickly sell those, If you want to trade for a piece of county property, well, we're gonna have to go through the same process on the county property, all the, environmental stuff that they look at, so that's less desirable.
And so the federal agency or BLM screen that identifies these disposable or whatever, they've already gone through EIS and all that.
Yes, yes.
And I think it's important to note, and in some of these criteria, for instance, this is a great example of it. The risk is time.
Right.
It's a schedule risk issue, because it might be a great site and everything might pencil out super for it. But, from a schedule risk standpoint, it really scores low. And that's really how that plays in on things like that. And part of that schedule risk is because of the environment, the level of environmental review and scrutiny and appeals that could happen under NEPA for a site like that.
Thank you.
Working with the BLM, the county, just in general, it's clear that they don't have a problem maybe divesting things that are kind of on the edges or an island that they own, very, very unlikely that we can say, hey, there's 650 acres here in the middle of 10,000 acres that you own, we want that. Yeah, so we didn't look really hard at BLM, especially, we looked at their list, we look for opportunities, but really the crux of the conversation we had with them was, wow, you wanna tuck your landfill footprint right up against the property line of ours? We're happy with that. We will take steps to ensure that we don't introduce a development in your buffer zone. So you're more than happy to work with us. And that's the approach that we're going to take, as opposed to saying, all these thousands and thousands of people, I think this is, there's something to hear anywhere, that might work for us. So,
And even those little islands that they want to dispose of, there's still gonna be a lot of public use.
Oh,
Yeah,
Oh,
oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, the public. will come.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, under other criteria, they could be, scored low.
Yeah.
Sure.
So if there are any other questions on criteria, by all means, speak up on them or get back to myself. And I'll got this kind of work out the filter system for between meeting contacts here. But what we're looking for from the committee is to take a look at this and ask questions. If you think that the weighting on scoring is anything that should be adjusted, we would definitely like to hear back from you on this. We used our best judgment on this. And again, we're not driving this. We want your guys' input on this. So I kind of wanted to close with that so we could look at the next thing here. And then we can get back to some nuts and bolts on this if we want to. So.
To me, I don't have the background to be able to tell you if it should be 35 or 30 or.
Yeah, and again, the point that Dwight made is there's a highly skilled group of qualified people that have been working on this for a number of months now here. So I think this is the best of the best that have been working on this too, and gave that weighting with their judgment. But then again, still we want to see how it works with the committee members as well.
Very much so, because you're looking at it through a different lens. And, something might just pop out at you and say, why didn't you consider this? And we'd love to hear those, because those are really critical to how these come together.
So there'll be a few, when I look through it, and I'll use one example. So how far was the site from a main road? When we were trying to site a landfill in the early 90s, we had that criteria. And the closer to the road, the higher the score. That means less road that we have to build, right? But now it's kind of flopped. And close to the road is a negative score because of the visual impact people drive by. So it's, we're looking for your input on those kind of conundrums,
Yeah.
Well, so getting back to like the cost, but that's not really in here. You're gonna look at detail later, but I just wonder if there's a subjective cost. Like your 0 to 5. But I ought to go in there somewhere so we kind of have an idea that, well, it looks really good, but even initially, this is going to be a very expensive site for some reason. The haul distance or it's way out of Hampton,
Yeah, and without, and although maybe in a haul distance, we could put a dollar onto it, but really it's basically, all right, how far is it from the central? How far is it from the land?
Right.
And if it's 5 miles out, you get a big high score because that's really a cost saving. It's 30 miles out, you get a much lower score because you've got that part.
And that's in here.
So yeah,
They're very small.
the costs are, some of the cost factors are in there. We talked about soil, distance from centroid, those are included in here. And as far as the percent allocation, it's Rob, you said, it's a very small amount, and I guess it is, but we're trying to balance scoring and percent weighting on all the other factors, the risk of the engineering.
I normally come from an environmental perspective, but the practical side of me says that ought to be more than 1.5% of the total weight.
Okay, well,
It ought to be something much higher, because if the cost is really high, you just have to consider it.
In terms of process, will it be that we will approve a draft and then it'll go to the commissioners and then the public will have I'm thinking of groups that might also have opinions on things like this, and they'll get their opportunity to provide feedback like before an appeal as well.
Yeah, that's a good question, Chris. For you could put it out there for comment forever.
Totally. No,
So the process we have at this time is that the SWAC will put their seal of approval. It'll be recommended to the board. for review approval, and then they'll approve it. It's not gonna be like a work session where there's gonna be an open public comment period.
Okay.
I don't believe that is the board's intent. When we sat down and talked about our process we were gonna go through here, they did say we would like to see those criteria before you move forward on it. So
Okay.
that's a step where we've included them in on. And I'm not sure, they may want to weigh in further down the line too. At this point, this is the only intermediate step they've expressed interest in weighing in on, but yeah, if we were to open it up for open public comment, we may not get very far for a long period of time. And that's- yeah.
Chad, you have a comment in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I'd like to make a comment.
It's in the chat.
In the chat.
Oh. Chat. Curiosity is it is the county users tied to S3 software. Yes, it is, Keith. Oh, and as far as the, no, so the S3 software is part of the Dial system. This is not at this point put out on Dial for public consumption because we have not finished working on it yet. And that's a good question as to whether or not that GIS thing would be available. You know, it's going to be a working document where we're going to be able to toggle on things for screening. So, you know, we actually have not talked about that being available. You know, certainly images on that would be posted on the website for the project here, but that's something we probably should talk about is just how that is available if the public would have the ability to turn on sage graphs or something like that to see things here. That's a conversation. So Keith, is that what you were asking about? If they'll be able to
Yeah, yes, I was just curious because we use Esri software for our GIS mapping down in Sun River, and it's very helpful and it's done been a great resource for our natural resources department itself. And I like your thoughts there. Is like, you know, how one of your notes here, one of your bullet points says be transparent. So
yeah,
maybe it makes sense to be transparent, but once we have the proper information to share with the public itself.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to release information prematurely that may,
Right.
you know, give the wrong perception or misguide somebody here on it. But you know, that's an interesting concept that software may or may not be available. So Tim and I have paid license agreements to be able to access this particular S3 package that's being developed for this project, as have our IT people. So that license may not allow it to be open and available for the public, but certainly putting screenshots up on our website as we're navigating the process is something I would envision we would do, but making it publicly accessible, there could be licensing issues. I'm not sure. We'll have to have a conversation about that, sort that out.
I think you're right about the licensing issue. There's limitations on that. So I think it's good. Like you said, there's alternatives like screenshots would be fine too.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I honestly haven't thought about that at all.
Yeah, and it's a good point, Keith. Typically what we've done in the past is to provide for the product of the GIS analysis to be presented. And so it is, you know, quote unquote screenshots or something like that. But at the same time, showing how we came about getting to that, you know, to that map, showing, you know, areas that are available or not, or whatever it might be, as part of this transparency that's noted.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Keith.
And I can go through. So the other thing that we wanted to discuss here briefly with the SWAC was the public outreach goals. You know, this is a critical piece of public outreach right here, the SWAC. I mean, you really are, you know, with citizens at large, as well as with municipal and industry representation, a critical part of the public involvement process and public outreach. You know, the real point here, you know, and the goal set is, you know, it's to be transparent, to have a public committee, open meeting, of course, and the like, to be able to share the information countywide. We're working on methods for newsletters and other means to get the message out to all people to be able to have access through the county site. We'll be working with the county and our public outreach group, Barney and Worth, will work directly with the county, pulling materials together for sharing on the county website, so that, and very similar to how it was done for the solid waste management plan. I mean, it's transparent, open out there, to provide the information as you go through the plan. So engage with underrepresented communities to ensure that we're not looking at sites just where underrepresented communities might be, which is very critical from an environmental justice standpoint for facilities. Listen and provide opportunities for feedback throughout the siting process, and that's through the SWAC as well as participation of the public at various public outreach. This here being, I'm trying to remember exactly where this was. I'm at that meeting that Tim's presenting out here.
That was one of the wrap-up SWAC meetings on the solid waste management plan, I believe.
Yeah, and so they were open workshop type approach to present the findings for the solid waste management plan, seeing something very similar to that for the results of this process. And then the multiple engagement tool. This is really looking at newsletters, the various opportunities to present on social media and on the county website for both deliverables as well as just kind of generally what's happening with the process.
So one thing that's going on right now, so we had a rather long list of interested parties during the development of the solid waste management plan, and we've added to that and adjusted it to DEQ people, in particular people have come and gone out of DEQ. And right now, Barney and Worth is conducting some fairly detailed interviews with a selection of those people that are in the interested parties list. Some of them are representatives from the cities. I think they'll be reaching out to a few of the city reps that are on the SWAC, but also some of the environmental protection groups in the area, like the Oregon Natural Desert Association, people like that. Barney and Worth could be doing some rather detailed interviews with some of those people. So that's kind of part of our outreach and data gathering on the community as well.
Did you say if there was going to be a tribal consultation?
We were having conversations by email about that the other day, and one of the Bend City Council members is a member of one of the tribes. We were talking about maybe adding them onto the interested parties list. Was that conversation?
Yeah, that's correct.
So yeah, there is a tribal member that will be interviewed on it from the interested party list there. And I can't remember his name. I don't live in the city limits, so I don't. City council. There's city council, or is it school district or city council member? I thought it was city council. Yeah. So some local government official, elected official is going to be interviewed.
Yeah, Washington has their natural resource type people.
Yeah, and actually early on in the conversation about tribal groups, that was a question I had. I'm familiar with Orange Springs, but is there a tribal presence in the county as far as land? And I don't believe there is. But we still wanted to keep the tribes involved with it. So we did identify somebody. The name just escapes me at the moment. Sorry.
And if you get into public lands, federal lands, then you got the hunting gathering rights, treaty rights.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a critical piece of the cultural resources that is one of the two of the criteria here are actually based upon cultural and historic resources.
Last one.
So it looks like we have a hand raised.
Oh, do we? I'm not seeing it, so.
Yeah, that's probably mine, Greg.
Oh, there we go. No, I don't see a hand up on the board here. Well, go ahead.
Oh, actually,
yeah, okay.
There's a hand.
Yeah, it's anyway, Greg Sweeland with DEQ. I have a process question. There was talk about the recommendations going to the commission for kind of formal approval. And my question was whether the decision, kind of the crossroad of sending waste elsewhere versus moving forward with this siting process, was that ever voted on or adopted?
Yes, it was. And did you come in late, Greg?
I didn't come in late to this meeting. I'm kind of jumping into the middle of this process. This is my first meeting and I appreciate so much good information here. So I
Yeah.
apologize if this has been covered, but I was just curious about whether that had been formalized yet.
Okay, yeah, no problems. But yeah, it was formalized. The recommendation that came to the county commissioners from the solid waste management plan was to site a landfill in Deschutes County. And again, we waived doing the long haul to one of the facilities on the Columbia River and also alternate technologies there. So the
Super.
recommendation granted by the board and they approved was citing landfill in county.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah.
I think it's key to kind of emphasize that
There
point.
you go. All right,
You
okay.
know, that the decision has been made that we're going to site it in landfill. And we're not here to debate the wisdom of that decision.
Yeah, and that was an important part of the solid waste management plan, which really has to set the stage for this process. Yeah. So just continuing on public outreach, some of the activities, I've pretty much already, we've already hit on these, the interviews that Chad noted for stakeholders. Has a toolkit of outreach materials that'll be available through the process. Drafting content for the project webpage, which will be accessible through the county solid waste website. And then one of the things that really helps on these are, just a frequently asked questions series, because they will come up, we will come up with answers and to post those so that it's pretty consistent and so that both the SWAC as well as the public in general sees those.
Because we had a page, in the development of the management plan.
Yeah.
So every draft was there that people could look at, notes from the meetings, et cetera. It'll all be out there on the web.
I was on the original SWAC for the management plan, and what I learned today, which I didn't understand, was that this facility will continue to have a different role in the whole thing. And so on the FAQ or somewhere, I think people need to understand that. So
That's a good point, because that question does come up often. Is this all going away? Or you gonna go down and town?
Yeah, okay, thanks.
I'm trying to emphasize that because we hear that question a lot.
We do.
Well, where am I gonna have to drive to?
Yeah.
How about the changes for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is still the central receiving point for the band area. It always will.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Yeah, it's actually a rarity now for people to go out to the landfill. And that's pretty rare throughout the Northwest anymore. Because most landfills are fairly isolated. And so it's, the last thing you want is everybody getting out there. Yeah. And that would be a waste of all these great facilities the county already has.
Yeah, I think the general public is not gonna be traveling to land.
Yeah.
Depending on where the landfill is, you might see some garbage trucks in the neighborhood
Yeah,
going
right.
directly to the landfill. But the landfill is 30 plus miles out there, everything's coming here. Even quite possibly waste coming out of transfer stations come here.
Yeah.
Particularly interested in picking through and getting things out of there that don't need to go to the landfill, and then get reloaded. So that's all a really kind of an economic question, how far can you go and still, have it make economic sense, to do this or to do that, so.
So the last point here is really, so as we're screening sites, we'll have targeted outreach. And so the idea being that, as information comes available, we'll have, things that go on social media as well as on the website, but also to have meetings, interest groups, meetings, as well as neighborhood and backyard outreach. As you can see from this, as you get closer to sites, you have those backyard meetings, and those are really important. Those are the outreach to the neighborhood, outreach, to those people who could be impacted by a facility, and bring people out here to take a look at not what is a, a modern operating facility look like? And, and what will the new facility look like? So it's a real opportunity to ensure that, the public really is engaged in the process. Interview. Okay. What was the last time? Okay. So the communications pyramid, I know this is pretty hard to see if you if you have your hand out of this. The idea being that there's levels of interest in a project. So ultimately, the decision makers are on top. That's the Board of County Commissioners. I mean, they are the group that makes the final decision. You're right in that next tier, though, as the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, because you are advising. I mean, that's why you're advisory committee. You are advising the county commissioners on this project. And so, other environmental groups, land use authorities, regulatory agencies, of course, and others are key to that. They're very interested parties and key to that advice being passed along to the commissioners. Then there's others that are interested. This is the community groups. This might be, the municipalities, solid waste sector, haulers and the like. As well as the media, getting the message out. And then those who, not quite yet interested. Oftentimes people aren't interested, maybe now, they get more interested as you get closer to a site or closer to a project actually happening. And then they kind of, oh, okay, this is what the county is going to do. That can be positive or negative. I mean, just based upon, how they see the site. And what's interesting, what we've done in the past is that, at the solid waste plan level, it's still pretty conceptual. Okay, yeah, we're gonna have this landfill here in the county. We want that, and which was very strong, and it'll probably remain strong going into this process. I wouldn't see any reason why it wouldn't. But at that point, you'll probably see more interest just in, okay, now what does that really mean to have a site? And I think that's where it really becomes important that the message really gets out to people, because one of the key will be the thing we just raised. Well, what happens with not? Well, that's still critical in the whole process here, and and the operations of the solid waste system. And so people will need to be educated on that, and how does the current system continue to support the new facility. And so those are some of the things, and that's particularly will be helpful, getting the newsletters and the media, being able to get that message out as well. And that is the whole point.
One more question on the criteria. And you mentioned power generation is going to become more important in the future. Are all parts of Deschutes County have similar access to the grid and to substations and all that, or should that be also a criteria?
Yeah, it's funny that you raised that, because that was raised here very recently in our review, and back to the point of picking that up within the cost evaluation of sites, because utilities, and that's utilities going both ways, because a site like this could be an energy producer. We could have solar on the site. We could have renewable natural gas that then is for combustion and for power generation. And so, we could generate power, most likely generate more power than we would need for a site like this. And so how do we get that wheeled back onto the grid? And so that is a piece. We've decided to generally include that within the criteria of utilities, of distance from utilities, distance from infrastructure. Yeah.
That's one of these.
Well, it's written into the site development, and so it will not be a specific item in there, access to power. But it's generally seen as the cost of a site. It will be one of the key factors in determining cost of development of the site. And so again, it's hard to do that when we're doing this broad level screening, but we will definitely do it at the focus level, what the cost is.
I still have this image that all this will lead to a bunch of sites out in Hampton being having higher scores, but really less practical, more expensive, and power grid issues and things like that. So I don't know how to tell you to change this.
Yeah, like I said, we did have a conversation about utilities in particular, and I remember there's something in the text in this document about that, but getting down to the true cost analysis, things like road construction, things like that, is when we filter down to those 3 sites. I guess anything is possible. We could end up with 3 sites that are on the very back end of Deschutes County there.
Maybe because
If that happens, I think we need to revisit things here, but it's difficult to apply the when you start getting to very specific criteria. When we're looking on the broad based part of the screening, it's difficult to get those kind of specifics in there.
So we're just this morning, we interviewed a firm. We want to have a gas recovery project here at this landfill. And these days, everybody is talking about basically cleaning it up to renewable natural gas standards and putting it in the pipeline. And because the pipeline is right here on our property, right? So thinking about RNG doesn't really make a difference where the new landfill is, because that can be containerized and brought here. I mean, the infrastructure to get it in a pipeline is significant. And so, you're not gonna, if we got a spot here, then we'll truck gas to this spot. That makes the most sense. Electricity, way different, obviously, if you're 30 miles out there, I don't know how that works, how you could get onto the grid, or, what that takes. So.
Yeah, and that's, one of the things I do want to note is that while, some things may seem like they're really expensive right now, when amortized over a 50 to 100 year site, they're fairly small. And I don't want to make it out that they're insignificant, but in looking at the bigger picture, you do. I mean, that is why we look at the net present value of a site that is out 30 to 50 years. Maybe we don't want to do the whole 100-year site to show it, but show what this truly could be for this 30 to 50-year site.
I think the 100-year criteria that we set, we never. I don't know if you'll be landfilling anything, but the point we were trying to make is we're not going to go through this process again.
Yeah.
We're going to site a facility that's going to be called a solid waste management facility. And we'll do whatever we need to do to manage our solid waste on that facility. We're not going to do it again, so. That could be interesting. I think there's room to compromise on whether it's a 100-year site or a 75-year site, depending on all the other factors that might make a site desirable. So we may have to wrestle with that before we're done here.
To clarify, oh, go ahead.
The 250 acre footprint for a 100-year site, and then management plans, you should have another 250 acres for buffer. If you put that out there, 250 acres in a square, then the other 250 acres around the square is a quarter mile. And that's if there's a neighbor with 100 yards past a quarter mile, we're that could be a problem, I guess. So we didn't incorporate a large enough area for buffers, but we knew we weren't ever going to run into anybody else. And you'll see as we get into this, it's probably a whole lot of sites east. Just looking at available land and lot sizes, but sage grouse is going to eliminate a lot of those. So we're either out there past the sage grouse, or we're in here next to development. That's a fear that I have. And that's the choice we're going to have to make.
So to clarify, is the final recommendation driven by the average weighted score, or the highest average weighted score? Or is there like subjectivity built into that, like?
Yeah, so typically what happens, so we'll use the scoring to get us down to, let's say, the final 3 sites. And that generally is pretty objective, getting it down to those sites. Then you're kind of really diving in deep to the details, and that's both, you know, the drilling we have to do on the site, you know, the really detailed site investigations, the cost estimates that we have to do, and the like. Some of that can be seen a little bit more subjectively, possibly just because, you know, we might be able to look at a site and, you know, we could develop this a little bit differently because of the lay of the land or whatever it might be. And all of a sudden it might score better or worse because of the way we're able to look at it. Typically you're trying to do these things so it scores better just because, okay, how can you take advantage of, now that we really know this site, how can we take advantage of, you know, of those unique situations there. But then really, I think what's important is that when we get down to those final 3 sites, they'll probably all be viable sites. In that there is some subjectivity to saying, well, which is best? This is kind of where you come in. Well, is it better to be 35 miles out, or no, only 20 miles out, even though it's impacting a little bit more the community right there? You know, it's kind of one of those things that you play out. It's
so the score doesn't win necessarily.
The board went. I'm being very careful not to back the board into it.
Yeah, I get the board piece, but to her point.
Yes.
You know, is there another evaluation, a different set of numbers that apply to those 3 sites, or?
Yeah, the score in theory will drive us to those 3 sites. There may be some subjectivity as we go through to get to those 3 sites. So I think when we get down those 3, weighing distance to haul versus a site that's closer with proximity to neighbors, those may, you know, we may subjectively say this is actually a better site because we impact fewer neighbors, although it's further out. Yeah, that's just as an example. So I think there will be subjectivity to some extent when we get to the end, and that's going to be a conversation to have with the SWAC people.
Yeah, great question. I was sitting here thinking about that the whole time.
No, it really was.
You know, get a calculator out.
Yeah. Yeah, because one of the things that comes into play, I mean, does that 35 mile, is that more important, you know, and even in a cost situation than maybe, you know, a site that might cost a little bit more closer in, because at that point, you're kind of looking at a crystal ball. What is the cost of energy going to be in, you know, in 15 years in, you know, in haul, you know, in your haul? Or will there be new technology? So, hey, all the haul trucks are running off of electric, and we're actually able to charge them out at the site because we've got solar out there at the site. You know, there's these different things that come into play that can play differently for different sites at that point.
So, without sort of monkey wrench into what we know already. So there's a possibility that, so we use these criteria, 50 different criteria. And we know that there's 6 or 7 criteria that we're not going to be able to look at because it requires field work. But we use the 45 or 43 that we have to come up with this short list of 3. At that point, I guess it's possible to say, okay, all the scoring up to this point is now set to the side, and these top 3, this group is going to say 1, 2, and 3. You know, as opposed to, okay, how did these ones score on the remaining criteria, add to the previous criteria, and come up with a number? I'm just suggesting the ways to kind of, how do we ease into a little bit of that subjectivity?
Right. You know, and I think what it really comes down to is you don't necessarily want to toss that earlier evaluation, because I mean that's really important to your deliberations and kind of looking at a site. You know, looking at these final 3 sites, and then maybe at that point, you know, you do think when you're down to that level, and you can think a little bit maybe more subjectively, and say, you know, really that haul distance is more important than we were really thinking to begin with. And so looking at these 3 sites, you know.
I can guarantee you from the price of diesel when we put the plan together.
Well, no,
price
it's
of
true.
diesel Today.
You bet, you bet. Yeah, but I mean, the price of diesel has gone up, you know, 35% since we, or 50% since we first put this criteria in here. So, yeah.
Collaboration or scoring?
I think it's a combination of
Yep,
both.
yep, yeah.
We'll work through it.
I have one additional question for the group.
Sure. You volunteered.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so just out of curiosity, what's the anticipation to get from 50 feasible sites down to 3? What's our time frame? When are we looking for to accomplish that goal?
I'm thinking 12 to 14 months.
Okay.
That's our agreement, our current agreement with Parametrics takes us down to that short list of 3 sites. And I think the schedule we had worked out during negotiations, the agreement was 12 to 14 months. So if we can move faster, that's good. If we can buy time to give us a little cushion on the 2029 date, that's a good thing. But we don't want to rush this process. We don't want to shortcut anything. We want to be thorough.
Sure.
Yeah.
Makes great sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
One more question, sorry.
Sure.
Do you have a breakdown of what the level 3 weights are, like overall as well? So you know how within each category, we're seeing like 40, 20, 40? Are there numbers for what those look like in the context?
Oh, so exactly what that percentage is of the
Yeah.
whole 100% for all,
Right.
we can generate that very easily. So
I
we
think
can.
Robin threw a number out there of
Well,
1.5.
yeah.
That's a best.
I think Robin already did that in his head. Yeah, we could actually do that, and get it out to everybody.
Yeah. So our official bid clock on the wall here is clicking to 3 o'clock sharp right now. So we're on schedule for concluding the meeting. A few other things to talk about is the next meeting. So this meeting, we threw out a doodle poll just to get this meeting going. This is not the set day of the month or day of the week that we'll be holding this meeting. So I'm going to be getting together with Sue Manette, our management analyst, and give her a hand here. She puts these all together for us. But we're going to put a doodle poll out to try to identify a specific day of each month for a meeting. I think the SWAC meetings were on the third Thursday of the month, every month. So try to set a fixed day each month for this, and it'll ease everyone's scheduling and planning here. So just look for something coming from us on a doodle poll to see if we get a happy medium for everybody for a regular meeting schedule here.
Chad, you've got another
Oh, I'm sorry.
comment in the chat box.
Thanks for progress. Okay, I need to sign off. Thanks, Bill, if you haven't already left.
If we do stick with the Thursday, 1 o'clock, 1:30 would be easier for me. 'Cause
Okay.
I have a meeting in Redmond that ends at noon,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
that way that's too much.
Yeah, the other point, this is actually just a temporary meeting location. This is easy to get quickly. I was talking with Sue. We need to find county facilities that have internet and Zoom capabilities here. We were using a meeting down at the county commissioner's office. If that's more convenient for everybody, we can go there. We don't know if the road department has this technology available here. So I suspect we'll probably hold meetings on the regular schedule downtown rather than here. I think the whole, as we progress on this, again, we wait further into it, there'll probably be more interested parties participating, so this room can be a little bit squeezed. Yeah. Okay, if there's no last minute things, anybody else online? Thank you all for attending and participating in this. Very exciting. Very much wanting to get the ball rolling on this. Like I said, we haven't been sitting on our hands the past 2 years here, but the momentum's really going to start at this point forward, and I thank you all for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we gotta make sure we have.